This RealAg Radio episode podcast is brought to you by high-performing carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide delivers fast, selective, and extended control of aphids in alfalfa and pulses, leaving beneficials like lady beetles to help in the fight. Ask your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/ca today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Well, hello and welcome to this Agronomic Monday here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and yes, it is the last day of March 31st. Tomorrow, be warned. It is April Fool's Day, and I hope this year we all have a little bit of fun with it, because goodness knows we deserve it. Okay, on today's show, hey, we've got some agronomic stuff. With all the election stuff going on, of course, we can't forget everything that's going on there. So we will kick off the show, as we have been doing for the past few weeks, with a bit of policy and political talk. We've got Kyle Larkin with the Grain Growers of Canada and Calvin Hepner in conversation about the Grain Growers Vote for Grain campaign. So you hear about that. We've also got a product spotlight with Carolyn Wilson of Syngenta Canada. And of course, we've got Peter Wheat Pete Johnson joining me for the last two segments of today's show to cover a few things. So we are going through the tail end of an ice storm here in Ontario. We're going to talk about some early season scouting on some winter canola, as well as I've got some questions about protecting nitrogen, especially early nitrogen. We're going to talk a bit about sulphur, and we're also going to talk about, well, Pete hit the stage this past weekend with his latest theater production. So we'll talk about that as well. Now, I do mention later in the show, but I want to mention it now as well. Tonight, The Agronomist, 8 p.m. Eastern. Find it on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or just go to realagriculture.com/agronomist at showtime. I've got Joanna Wallace and Terry Aberhart going to join me, and we are going to talk about surviving and thriving during the busy season. So we're going to talk about time management, dealing with people, and of course, taking care of number one. That's you. So join me tonight. I really hope it is so much fun, this show, and it is really great to see everybody in the comments and be able to ask live all your questions, all those sorts of good things. So check that out. If you've got feedback on today's show, 1-855-776-6147, or send me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and I'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
It's now time for a product spotlight with Vantage Ag. Talking right now to CEO Paul Sigovich. How can Vantage Ag's new sub-nano liquid fertilizer products help growers reduce their costs?
At Vantage Ag, we've spent the last few years proving that our sub-nano liquid technology can replace a significant portion of traditional granular fertilizer at a fraction of the cost. For example, a standard 140-10-20 actual blend for canola costs about $155 an acre. By switching to our sub-nano liquids, cost drops to $53 per acre. That's over $100 in savings per acre while delivering the nutrients exactly when the plant needs them. Simply mix our new fertilizers with your in-crop pesticide applications throughout the growing season. Our products are applied at very low rates, are compatible with nearly all pesticides, and now you have the added benefit of applying the specific nutrients your crop needs exactly when they need them. Vantage.ag, and they can always give us a call at 778-919-3370.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host for this Agronomic Monday, Lyndsey Smith, and a reminder that you can skip the trip. CCIA ships RFID-approved tags straight to your door. Order online at tags.canadaid.ca, that's CANADAID.ca, or call 1-877-909-2333 for beef cattle tags and pre-approved tags for cervids and goats. We hop now to a conversation with my colleague Calvin Hepner and Kyle Larkin with the Grain Growers of Canada.
April 28th, Election Day in Canada, will be here before we know it. And joining us here on Real Agriculture now to discuss from, of course, the grain producer's perspective, we're pleased to welcome Kyle Larkin, Executive Director of Grain Growers of Canada. Thanks, Kyle, for taking time. I know election season is also busy in terms of government relations for you, so thanks for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about this Vote for Grain campaign that Grain Growers is running during the election here.
Yeah, thanks for asking. And as everyone knows, we've dived into an election since last Sunday, and in response to that, Grain Growers of Canada launched our election campaign called Vote for Grain, and it's hosted at voteforgrain.ca, and it includes two parts. One part is a click and send campaign to get producers, grain farmers across the country to send letters to their local candidates, letting them know about the key issues that are impacting them right now. And the second piece is a key issues guide that really gives an overview as to where all the political parties stand on various issues, but also gives a quick briefing on each issue, so producers, grain farmers can be aware that when they go to the polls, they can be aware where the parties stand and really vote with that awareness.
So we've seen, in terms of election discussion topics over the last couple of weeks here, Kyle, leading into the election campaign, we saw some commitments from the government around the carbon tax, capital gains, changes in line with what farmers and farm groups have been seeking. Are you pleased with some of the policy changes that have been announced here leading into the election?
Yeah, so our letter on the Vote for Grain website, the click and send campaign, actually is still advocating for three things. Number one is trade uncertainty, and I know we can get into that. Number two is the carbon tax, and number three is the capital gains tax increase. And the reason we're still lobbying on the carbon tax and the capital gains tax increase is because we still don't have clarity on both of those issues yet. So number one, on carbon tax, the Prime Minister did reduce the consumer carbon tax to $0, but as easy as he can reduce it to $0, he can also bump it back up to where it was. So we're looking for a permanent legislative solution to the carbon tax. And on a capital gains tax increase, there was mass confusion, not just with us, but with the CFIB, with many other groups in Ottawa that have been advocating against the capital gains tax increase. On the Friday before the election, the Prime Minister came out with a press release that said he will be canceling the capital gains tax increase. I read it as he will be, as in he'll be canceling it post-election. And what we actually need is a letter from the Minister of Finance to the Canadian Revenue Agency informing them that the capital gains tax increase is officially reversed. That letter hasn't been drafted yet. It hasn't been sent. So until we see that letter go through and we see a very public release from the government saying that it's permanently reversed, we're not celebrating just yet.
Okay. Those are both long-standing issues in the ag community, but they have definitely been overshadowed by, as you alluded to, the issues on the trade front with both the U.S. and China, our two largest export customers in Canadian agriculture, of course. Our new Ag Minister, Cody Blois, announced or proposed changes to agri-stability on the eve of the election campaign. Kyle, what are you hoping to hear from the parties on the China tariffs, on the U.S. trade situation in terms of mitigating the impact there on farmers' bottom lines as the election campaign unfolds here, as we're talking to candidates, as farmers are engaging with their local candidates?
Yeah, we've been very clear since day one that farmers can't survive a trade war on two fronts. We cannot have a trade war with our largest trading partner, the United States, at the same time that we have a trade war with China. I met with Minister Cody Blois actually just last week, right before the election was called. We discussed a number of topics, but number one obviously was trade uncertainty. And I made it very clear to him that enhancements to the advanced payments program, enhancements to agri-stability, they're appreciated, they're welcome, but they don't go far enough. And what producers are looking for, and this is what I'm hearing from most grain farmers across the country, is they're looking for a new program that would deliver dollars directly to them to compensate them for the losses that have been incurred because of the Government of Canada's decision to impose 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and steel and aluminum. Let's not forget that the tariffs that China has taken, the 100% tariffs on canola meal, canola oil, and peas, are retaliatory tariffs. They are a response to the tariffs that Canada placed on very important goods from China. And unfortunately, grain farmers have been caught in the middle of this trade war. So I know that there's already huge impacts there. At the same time that we have continued uncertainty with our largest trading partner, the United States. We'll see obviously what happens on April 2nd in terms of reciprocal tariffs or in terms of tariffs across the board. Obviously tough to track what President Trump says on a daily basis or on a minute basis, as well as his administration. But that general uncertainty is driving commodity prices down. And that's really hurting the bottom lines of grain farmers. And that's why that's our number one issue when it comes to Vote for Grain.
Any specific examples or templates that you see that type of program following in terms of figuring out what producers are owed, measuring the damage caused by these tariffs, that type of thing?
Yeah, I think we'll leave the specificities up to the government. But what I was very clear with Minister Blois was, I go back to the start of COVID-19. The government was very quick at launching these massive government support programs for Canadians, which were needed at that time. And many farmers were able to tap into some of those programs as well. But I use that example to showcase that this isn't new territory that we're in. The government has the capability of launching programs at a whim. The unfortunate piece is that obviously the government is in a caretaker mode right now because of the election. And so understood that AAFC and the government could only do so much with the very limited amount of time that they had. But we're still pushing them to say that that farmers need to be fully compensated for the loss that the government has caused them. And agri-stability, APP, great programs. But look, I'll look at agri-stability. I go to a survey that Grain Growers of Canada ran in 2019 that looked at the opinion of grain farmers on these various programs. About 50%, give or take, of producers access agri-stability. But when you look at the approval rating or the disapproval rating, it's very high in the negative. I believe it was around 60 to 70% of producers were not happy with agri-stability, and I know that continues to this day. There's many issues and challenges with the program. So not only do you have 50% plus of producers that don't access that program, but then the ones who do access have issues with the program. So it's certainly not a perfect solution, and there needs to be a serious thought by government as to how they can fully compensate grain farmers for the losses that they're currently incurring.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, we're also seeing our counterparts south of the border also receiving direct payments based off of market declines and that type of thing. Do you see the Canadian government, I know our purse strings in Canada and political clout of the agriculture side of things isn't maybe necessarily as strong as it is in the U.S. Do you see the Canadian government having appetite for that type of program similar to what's being run in the U.S.?
I think so. I mean, you just look yesterday or the day before that, Prime Minister Mark Carney, during the campaign, announced $2 billion for the auto sector. That's not a drop in the bucket, and that was in response to the tariffs that President Trump has announced or will be announcing on Canadian automobiles. So obviously that's an important sector for the Canadian economy, but agriculture arguably is equally or more an important sector when you look at the GDP contributions and the jobs across the country. So my message to the current Prime Minister Mark Carney, is $2 billion for the auto sector is great, but we could also use another $2 billion or more in the agriculture sector to fully compensate grain farmers. Obviously, the numbers, we'll figure out what those numbers are, and that's up to the government to figure out. But at the end of the day, the message is very clear that farmers need to be compensated dollar for dollar for what they're losing right now because of this trade war with China and the uncertainty with the United States.
So as somebody who's representing the agriculture community and farmers' interests in Ottawa, Kyle, how do you make that argument to lawmakers? We have, of course, Central Canada, Ontario is front top level importance to a lot of politicians, especially federally. How do you make that argument or that comparison relative to the auto sector and the support the auto sector seems to often get, especially from a Western Canadian farmer's perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the message that we're constantly delivering is that the agriculture sector isn't just a rural sector. It contributes to the entire Canadian economy. So the wheat grown in Saskatchewan is milled in Ontario and then baked in Ontario and then either consumed somewhere in Canada or exported internationally. There's a huge supply chain, a food supply chain that's not just based in the prairies. It's not just based in rural areas of Canada, but it supports an entire other industry, an entire food processing, agri-food sector across the country that employs tens and hundreds of thousands of Canadians, certainly a lot more than the auto sector. And you can't forget that 1 in 9 jobs are tied to agriculture in Canada. The contributions to the GDP are massive. They're actually larger than the auto sector. So those are messages that we're delivering. It's easy, obviously, to forget the ag sector by government, but that's why we're here, in Ottawa, reminding them on a constant basis of not only the contributions to rural communities, but also the contributions to the larger Canadian economy and the standard of living that every Canadian enjoys.
We heard the Prime Minister talk about the relationship with the U.S. The old relationship is over type of language he's been using on the campaign the last few days. How concerned are you about, or how feasible do you think it is for Canadian agriculture to look to other parts of the world given our geographic connection and integrated industries with the U.S.? Is it that easy to separate Canadian agriculture, and is that a concern for you in terms of the direction the Canadian government is taking?
Well, let's be clear. We export over $17 billion worth of grain and grain products to the U.S. every year. By far our largest trading partner, our second largest trading partner, just for an example, is China. They're at $8 billion. So they are more than 50% less than the United States. And I can tell you very clearly that there is no replacement market for the United States. And there's no replacement market for China either. Diversification is paramount. Look at other markets like Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, even markets in Europe or Northern Africa. That's key. We need to export more to those markets. But the question we have to ask ourselves, can we ever, in the near future or the long term, replace the United States or even replace China? The answer is no. They have massive population bases that drive a lot of the demand for our agriculture and agri-food products. And that's why we export over $17 billion of grain and grain products to the United States. They have a massive growing population. They're also just south of our border. So when you think of the logistics of being able to train all that grain down or grain products down, that just simply can't be replaced. So that's something the government needs to be aware of. But I agree with the Prime Minister that the context and the relationship between Canada and the United States certainly has changed. I'm not sure if we'll ever get back to where we've been. But I think that, the silver lining of this entire conversation is that it's really activated not only just grain farmers, but most Canadians to say, hey, we need to get our own house in check. I think there's been many years now of us just kind of floating by, relying on the U.S. trade relationship to get for our economic growth. I think there's a serious thought now by Canadians, by policymakers, by farmers to say, what can we do within our house to make ourselves more competitive? And there's 3 messages I've been delivering for the past few weeks, and they kind of follow the value chain. Number 1 is we have to get our research house in order. You look at the research funding, both public and private. It's been going down over the past few years. AFC isn't doing as much as they used to on the wheat side of things or on the cereal side of things. On the private side of things, there's ways that we can incentivize private companies to invest in research here in Canada. So number 1 is research. Number 2 is our value chains and our transportation networks and our infrastructure. For anyone who's been to the Port of Vancouver, you just have to be there for a few minutes to see that the infrastructure there is aging and it's crumbling and it's in need of a massive restoration. So if we want to take our trade and our economy seriously, we need to invest billions of dollars into the Port of Vancouver, as well as infrastructure across the country that's in well need of refurbishment. And number 3 is diversification, and both domestic and international diversification. So domestic diversification is us building up that value-added sector in Canada so that we're not exporting as much raw material, but we're producing more canola oil. We're producing more flour or baked goods. There's a lot more value add we can do here in Canada regarding our agri-food products. And then obviously there's international diversification and taking that a lot more seriously. We have this office in Manila, Philippines. Its role is to diversify our trade in the Asia Pacific. but I can tell you that the USDA has offices in every single country in the Asia Pacific, and they've been there for much longer than us. So one thing I've been looking at actually is, you look at President Trump, you look at the tariff situation, you look at the uncertainties causing on international markets. There's going to come a time when the U.S. may not be exporting as much grain and grain products internationally. The president has actually even said that he'd rather those products be used domestically rather than being exported internationally. So there's going to be market shares opened up internationally. I can tell you the Australians are taking it really seriously. They're looking to grow their exports. Canada needs to be at that table so that if there's a bit of market share opening up in Indonesia or even in China or Philippines or Vietnam, wherever it is, we should be the first ones at the table to take advantage of that.
All right. I think that's a good place to wrap this up. Thanks for taking the time again today, Kyle.
Thanks, Kelvin. The last note I'd give you is I encourage all your listeners to please visit voteforgrain.ca. A lot of issues we just covered, a lot of issues that are going to continue impacting grain farmers for days and months and years to come. So I encourage everybody to get involved this election by visiting voteforgrain.ca. Thanks again.
All right. Kyle Larkin, Executive Director with Grain Growers of Canada, joining us here on Real Agriculture and RealAg Radio. And certainly Kyle will be in touch as the election campaign unfolds here over the next month.
Thank you very much.
If you grow soy or edible beans in Ontario, you know that Sclerotinia white mold is no joke. Yield loss can be devastating, and timing fungicides can be complicated. But did you know there's a new seed treatment that can help mitigate yield loss? Start the year off with your best foot forward against disease. Ask your seed supplier or local Agromart group to pre-treat your beans with Heads Up. Part of a complete white mold management plan, ask your seed dealer about Heads Up today or visit headsupst.com.
Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcasts. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com, the Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It's now time for a product spotlight with Syngenta. We're joined right now by Syngenta's technical lead for fungicides, insecticides, and plant growth regulators. It is Carolyn Wilson. Carolyn, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks very much, Don. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, so I just read your title there. Give us a breakdown. What's all encapsulated in that? What are you doing in your role at Syngenta?
Yeah, my role, I really have the privilege of providing technical guidance and kind of problem-solving solutions to farmers, across Canada, help them with disease, other pests, and overall plant health concerns in all kinds of crops, actually. So, with that, not only through my role in Syngenta, but have a farming background and involved in various industry groups. I love plant pathology. It's really a passion of mine. And when I can bring that and find these practical solutions, to a customer, agronomic challenges, really excites me. So, and then today here, I'm really excited to help farmers talk about, understand enhanced plant health and in regards to fungicides and the science behind that and how it can be more productive crops for their farm.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest. You're right, like in a really great, exciting area of agronomy right now. There's a lot of interest in plant health and what are some of the things we can do to make that plant as healthy as possible, so to speak, so that, we're boosting yield. A happy plant, more output is really what our goal is. From your perspective, what do farmers, and this is a wide question, but what do farmers need to know about plant health?
Yeah, so, you nailed it there when we talk about plant health and bringing that, yield and better quality and just overall, production to a farmer. But, we've used plant health as a general term for a long time. Lots of people have used it, but I don't think anyone's really brought the science behind what that means until now. And, we can say it's a really nice term to use, but what does it mean? So I'm here to talk about really, what Syngenta's extensive R&D has come up with for answers to those questions and how that, our fungicides are providing that healthier, greener, and higher quality yield as well to achieve this. With that, when we talk about using fungicides to protect from diseases, that's really the goal of using a fungicide. Our Syngenta Miravis brands, we are providing highest level of disease control to some of those really destructive diseases that we have. And, all of our crops, like, sclerotinia canola, leaf disease, fusarium head blight in cereals, ascita, anthracnose, and pulses. And on top of that, they're also getting this benefit of plant health with our active ingredients. So back to that question about what is plant health and how do you describe it? When we relate that to a fungicide, it can really be described as a positive effect on the plant by using that fungicide in the absence of a disease. And not all fungicides have this plant health benefit. In Syngenta, and talked about that research, we really put those positive effects into 3 categories. Increased light energy capture is one of them. Increased chlorophyll leads to that greener plant. Improved water conservation is really important, and that's also one of those benefits that you're going to be seeing from our fungicides. And then, with that is enhance that harvest efficiency, quality, and yield. So really what it comes down to is optimizing plant development. And, especially during our short kind of Canadian growing seasons, we have adapidin and solatinol, keeping them healthier and allowing more time for that plant to fill grain and give you that yield potential.
Yeah, so let's hit on both of those, adapidin and solatinol. What do they do? How do they work?
Yeah, so those are our active ingredients that power our Miravis and Elatis fungicides. So we talked about, great disease control with using those, but the science behind how they work does go back to those 3 categories that I kind of mentioned. So that greening effect that you're going to see really is linked to increased chlorophyll and being able to capture more light into that plant. So it allows that plant to function more optimally for, development, and it makes them look greener and healthier. And then, adapidin and solatinol, really what it comes down to, it reduces plant transpiration rates or the loss of water out of that plant. But even though it does that, it maintains photosynthesis at a stable level. So what essentially that is conserving water, but continuing to develop even under water stress conditions. And as we know how important it is to maintain water, because that's directly related to yield potential. If we don't have that, we will have a shutdown of that plant or that growth. And with maintaining moisture, we're also optimizing nutrient use efficiency. So very important to our customers, obviously, and that's really where it comes down to the end result and at the end of the day. And there again, that higher yield, better quality, profitable harvest. So, that healthier crop also extends to healthier straw and stubble and, other benefits that come with those active ingredients.
Yeah, I like better profits. That sounds really good. I think a lot of the audience does as well. What kind of feedback are you getting on the suite of Miravis fungicides?
Yeah, so Miravis fungicides have been around for the last 5 years and launched in Canada 5 years ago. And we have a lot of reports, a lot of stories from the field really showing visually that Miravis is greener than an untreated or a competitor fungicide-treated crops. So we were regularly getting those questions like, why are they looking greener? Why do they look so good? And because it was very visual in the field, seeing those healthier plants. And, we are, have the data to respond to that it really is that adapidin and solatinol molecules in those fungicides. We can explain it with science and data. And like I said, the term's been used a lot, but we're the first company that's actually backing it with that science and data. So positive feedback from the farmers is that noticed plant health, the benefits, advancing that crop development, improved standability is another piece, and ultimately yields and crop quality. So for the most part, farmers reports, these positive return on investment from using the product. So even in low disease pressure situations, they're seeing really good return on investments by using our, solatanol and Depidan products. At the end of the day, that's the goal, putting the most money in their pocket as they can. That's their goal. And, it's also our goal at Syngenta as well.
Carolyn, if somebody wants more information about Miravis fungicides, where do they go?
Yeah, so I suggest you reach out to your local Syngenta rep in your geography, and also your local retail will have some information on this to help you out.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot for joining us here today on RealAg Radio for this product spotlight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean.
Great stuff. Okay, we'll be right back with more of RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 right after this.
Find everything you need for outstanding weed control in your wheat and barley from the cross-spectrum herbicide experts at Corteva. Corteva is proud to offer a wide selection of cross-spectrum herbicides for maximum convenience, effective resistance management, and customized control of your toughest grassy and broadleaf weeds. No matter what kind of weed challenges you're experiencing, we've got the right fit for your farm. Visit corteva.ca to learn more.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Agronomic Monday, March 31st. And remember, you can enhance your production potential and boost the bottom line by selecting reliable varieties of wheat, durum, barley, and oats from Alliance Seed. Elevate your fields at allianceseed.com or call 1-877-270-2890. Well, one of those people that sure does know a lot about those wheat varieties. It's Peter Johnson. He's joining me here for this Agronomic Monday. How are you, Pete?
I am awesome. Thanks, Lyndsey. We had a great weekend. The weather's crap, but
that is true.
Beyond that, I am just excellent.
Yes. So for those who didn't follow along, perhaps on the news, Ontario got, or parts of Ontario anyway, got hammered with an ice storm. Here in the Ottawa Valley, Pete, we managed okay. Definitely gross. No one went anywhere yesterday. I was actually down with a stomach bug, which was even worse. But definitely parts of the province that are still without power this morning. Lots of down trees, down power lines. Realistically, not fun, but crop-wise, the winter wheat should be fine, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, I mean, from a people standpoint, one of my granddaughters is currently at Trent University. Mm-hmm. And so there was a few challenges there. Students worried tremendously about assignments due and not able to do them. Power was out. They even ran out of food, if you can imagine, which really speaks to how much our society counts on just-in-time delivery. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a real thought process to go through. But regardless, Phoenix was absolutely fine. She managed it well. That was kind of cool. From a cropping perspective, ice encasement for a long time is a bad thing. But ice encasement, when it just is very transient, it lasts for 24 or 36 hours. It's just the wheat crop, the alfalfa forage crops are not growing very fast if they broke dormancy at all in that region. And so they can tolerate that without too much trouble. I don't think this is an impact at all on crops. What I do think, I mean, certainly if you're a tree farmer, there's a big impact on crops. But from field crop perspective, I actually think the excess rainfall that some of the areas that didn't get freezing rain got is probably more of an issue. Some of the farmers up in Bruce County reporting 3 inches of rainfall. And, this time of year, you don't like to see that. We actually want to be low rainfall throughout the spring so we can get crops in the ground so that the wheat doesn't sit too saturated, the winter canola, all those kinds of things. So from a cropping perspective, excess rain is probably worse than the ice storm at this point in time.
Okay. And that brings up a couple things. So I will definitely say it does seem like we are in, for some areas at least, between snowpack and snowmelt and now, ice or rain event. This week of weather, which I would like to state for the record, it's supposed to be in like a lion, out like a lamb, or vice versa. March was kind of in like a lion, out like a lion, and I am not here for it. So if you could do something about that, Pete, I'd really appreciate it. Yeah. But I definitely think, mud season is never fun. And you're right. We typically in Ontario, and I would say just about anywhere, we want pretty dry conditions to get the crop in the ground. I know, yes, we've got, let's say, 3 to 4 weeks before we're really worried about anything, but it does feel like we are in a bit of a wet bias as far as conditions right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes, and I am not trying to be a doomsday sayer, that is not who Wheat Pete is, but oftentimes wet weather begets wet weather, dry weather begets dry weather. And so what's interesting is where I live, we've actually fared very, very well. And there were some people, I understand, in Essex County on last Friday on dry soil out drag lining manure onto their wheat fields. So Ontario's a big place, Lyndsey. A lot of other people that don't live here don't realize how big it is and how varied the weather can be from southwestern Ontario to your area, right, or even up into northern Ontario. But here where I am, we've only gotten, I don't know if we've gotten a total of an inch over the last 4 or 5 days. So we're not in such bad shape, but we don't want that to continue. It's early. I mean, realistically, if it stays damp-ish up until April 15th, we don't care a lot. From a wheat crop, a canola crop, winter barley crop, all of the winter forages for the dairy industry, sitting waterlogged this time of year is never a good thing. So for corn and soybeans, we don't care. That as long as it dries out on April the 15th, this doesn't matter. But for the crops that are in the ground, we really don't like this wet weather.
Now, you did mention, of course, some manure may be going on. Certainly, we heard of early sulphur going on, maybe some early nitrogen. And again, looking out my window, I can't believe anyone would, but that's because it wasn't where I am. So that's okay. In the deep Southwest, et cetera. But it does bring up the question about excessive water or heavy rainfall after something like a manure or a sulfur application. Which one should I be worried about? Are the nutrients I put there even there anymore?
So, Lyndsey, that's a great question. And I've had this discussion with so many growers, and kudos to them because they are concerned about the environmental impact, not only about the loss of that nitrogen for their crop, but also the environmental impact. So no one that I talked to was putting the full shot of nitrogen out. It's just too early, and the potential environmental impacts are very, very risky. For the growers that put ammonium sulfate on, so there's a little bit of nitrogen there, 20 pounds-ish. And what's really interesting is that nitrogen moves through the soil much more quickly than sulfate does. So nitrate moves more quickly than sulfate. You'd wonder why. They're both negative ions. So they're not held on the cation exchange capacity, but they are different. So that's kind of cool. If you put ammonium sulfate on, the ammonium is a positive cation, so it's held on the cation exchange capacity. So this time of year, the real worry to me is, did I put it on the frost and then before the frost could come out, or before it could move into the top inch of soil, did we get such a big thunderstorm that it all got washed off the field or it all got moved? And from all reports, we started the rain with nice, gentle showers. The frost came out for growers that put it on the frost. The first rain was a gentle shower. You get that gentle shower. It dissolves the ammonium sulfate granule. They're very, very water soluble. We had relatively dry soil in that top inch or something like that. It moved into the top inch. And after that, it's not a big concern unless we get a lot of soil erosion. So manure would be a little bit more of a concern just because it takes more rainfall and it doesn't all move into the soil quite as easily. But if we put it on a living crop, like a good growing wheat crop, then the crop itself is going to help slow down any movement of that manure off the field. And so for the most part, I don't think that we're in a big negative situation by what has transpired up until this point. And so I think we made the right decision. I didn't hear of anybody put on more than about 40 pounds of total nitrogen, and that's appropriate for this time of year. The greater question actually becomes on winter canola, because its demand is so early, and a lot of growers just say, well, man, it needs it right away, but splitting it on winter canola, so that has been a bit more of a discussion than even on winter wheat or winter barley.
Mm-hmm. Split application on even spring canola is one of those head scratchers as well, because it is a crop that needs it so early. But of course, in the winter varieties, we don't want it to get too big going into fall. And then on the spring ones, we need to get it on so early. Is it really worth it? Totally different discussion there. Now, one question though around this. So yes, conditions are different. Where I am, it is quite wet, and I do have rye in the ground that I want to get early nitrogen on. We have not put it on because it may have broken dormancy probably this week for sure. It looks like we've got some 11, 12, even a 17 degrees happening on Thursday. But the ground is wet. I don't know that I can get on there really early. And I'm worried if I'm putting nitrogen on, how do I protect it from losses? So Pete, I'm in a bind. What do I do?
So this time of year, Lyndsey, with the ground as cold as it is, the risk of loss is really quite low. And you can never say never, but what really creates loss is warm, damp conditions, or warm, wet conditions can cause it, but mostly if it's that wet, you haven't put the nitrogen on. Where we really see those big losses, and we saw them in winter wheat in 2012 in Elgin County, and we put it on April 20th, the nitrogen, and I mean, that is a solid date to put it on. The wheat crop's growing, it's got high demand, and then we got 3 days of rainfall that saturated the soil. And after that, we got 2 weeks of 20 plus degree temperatures and showery every day. It just kept that soil saturated. And that's when we really lose nitrogen by denitrification. The chances of losing nitrogen this time of year by leaching are really quite small. The other loss that we're concerned about is volatilization. And so if you put it on damp soil and it's warm and it's windy and the sun comes out, then you can lose it by volatilization, but you're wet. And the chances are in a day or two, you get another shower, you move it into that soil surface. So I'm not as worried about loss right now because of your cold soil conditions. And similarly here in the deep Southwest, we're still cold, and it takes a biological process to transform the urea or the ammonium into nitrate. If I use 28%, then a quarter of it is already in the nitrate form, so it's a little bit more susceptible. But even there, it still takes warm temperatures to really drive significant loss. And so I'm not very worried about loss this time of year.
Okay, so I still have time?
100% you have time.
Okay.
And the real question, Lyndsey, becomes if it stays wet, and warm, and you've got that rye crop, and you want it to grow like crazy for those woolly things that you chase around all the time. Do you hire the drone to come in and put on 40, 50, 80 pounds of ammonium sulfate to get a little bit of nitrogen there and some sulfur there to at least kickstart it until you can drive over the field and put the full shot of nitrogen on?
I feel that might be our best option. I will keep you posted, likely because you'll tell me I did it wrong, but I'm going to try. All right, Pete, I'm going to try. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more of Peter Johnson here on Agronomic Monday on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. This segment is brought to you by Oxbow, the latest innovation from New Farm, a versatile broadleaf in-crop herbicide powered by Duplisan technology. Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. Go to newfarm.ca or talk to your local ag retailer for more. All right, I am Lyndsey Smith, your host, and joining me, Pete Johnson. Pete, you had a very, very busy weekend up on the stage. How did it go?
It went awesome. So Thistle Theatre is currently producing, or our current production opened last Friday. So this past weekend, Email is the name of the show. And gosh, it just went amazing. And I got to touch wood because we have another weekend to go and I don't want to jinx it, but it's a really funny show, and the audiences were just almost rolling in the aisle at times with laughter. And that from a thespian standpoint, from the person on stage, it was so cool. When we did our dress rehearsal, we had just a few people in the audience to give us a little bit of laughter feedback. And when you don't get that feedback, you just don't ramp it up to that next level. And we have 3 first-time actors in our cast. And to see the difference in them from Tuesday night with no feedback, or very limited feedback, I should say, to Friday night with an almost full audience that just loved the show, and how that improved their delivery and their reactions and made the show so much better. So for the people listening, Lyndsey, if they do not realize this, the audience is a huge part of the show, and the feedback the audience gives will make or break that show for the actors on stage. So remember, when you're in the audience, you actually are a part of whether or not that particular evening or day will be successful.
That's right. When they say tough crowd, they mean it. It has an impact on the performance. So glad to hear it went well. Of course, another weekend still to go. But your theater is also doing a kickoff in about 2 weeks of another show that we do want to make sure we let everybody know about.
So I Am Enough is Sherry Garner. She grew up in the Embro area, dairy farm, and Sherry is a theater person. Left and went into theater and has done many, many theater productions. But over that time, she grew her family and has a child with Down syndrome, and really went through many, many mental health struggles and didn't even realize she was going through them. So this is the kickoff. She wanted to start it in Embro because that's her roots. And the I Am Enough Canadian tour will be April 11th and 12th in Embro. And Sherry is an amazing singer. Maggie comes up on stage with her. That's her daughter. The show is incredible. It's 90 minutes, and it focuses not only on Sherry's story, but on destigmatizing mental health. And there will be lots of people there that, if you want to learn about resources for mental health, we have all of that lined up. Go to thistletheater.com, go to Coffee Talk Productions, Coffee Talk Theater rather, is Sherry's website. Have a look. I think it's going to be an amazing show, and we'd really like people to, particularly people in Oxford County, because this is the Oxford County show, to come out and support that show.
All right. So you heard it here, folks. Go and get your tickets. And while you're at it, of course, get your tickets for Pete's show as well. And then heckle.
Heckle.
Yes,
I like it. Heckle,
Heckling,
yes.
Yes, exactly. Get into it. All right. Okay. On the agronomic front, we did mention, last segment, we did touch briefly on canola, but you were on a bit of a tour on Friday, zipping about, with Megan Moran. How does the winter canola crop look? What are we worried about?
Yeah, so winter canola is such an interesting crop, and I got to spend an hour with Megan at a field, and then of course I went back looking at wheat. But she sent me some other pictures of winter canola as well, and I have more winter canola to get to see that I just haven't gotten to. But you can walk a winter canola field that this time of year looks just brown as brown can be. But if those crowns are tight to the ground and you dig up the roots and the roots are solid and firm, that crop is 100% perfect. The field that we were in, one of the fields that I scout, was so interesting because you would see a green looking plant that you thought was perfect. And yet when you reached into the crown, some of those crowns were mush. Or you would dig the root up and it was just rotted right off. And the plant itself looked awesome. We often talk about getting winter canola in on time. This winter canola was planted on time, but was into some very dry soil conditions. And so some of the plants didn't emerge nearly as quickly as we would have liked. So we had some 4-leaf winter canola. So those tiny, tiny plants. And when I was scouting it last fall, I said, well, they're done. They're like that. They're just done. But they tended to be in the drier areas of the field. And guess what? We have all these nice little 4-leaf canola plants where it didn't get too wet. And they're 100% alive, looking fine. And they won't have the yield potential because they don't have as many growing points, as many buds. But they're alive, and that's astounding. Some of the bigger plants that we thought should be fine are gone. There's enough good plants, absolutely. There's enough good plants that we're keeping the field, but it's such an amazing crop to just walk through and you say, well, that's fine. And then you dig it up and say, maybe that's not so fine after all. So some of those plants that, looked good, and the top inch of the root is fine, but the bottom part of the root is not so good, they're probably going to survive, but the field does likely not have 100 bushel yield potential, just because those plants have a little bit of root injury, and it's just going to pull the yield potential back. And I think Megan made a great comment in that the field is absolutely worth keeping. But because it doesn't have top-end yield potential, or that's very unlikely, we probably want to pull our nitrogen rate back a little bit because there's no use putting nitrogen on that canola crop won't use.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, this is one of those ones that, like with a winter wheat crop, we have to wait till it actually breaks dormancy and to really evaluate what we've got there. But canola is a little bit different in that it's just the timelines are so different. So for those in the areas that are growing winter canola, is now an acceptable time to be sort of making some of these calls? Or if it's on the line, would you wait a little longer?
Well, I think, Lyndsey, it's pretty simple to wait a little longer because what am I going to do today? Mm-hmm. Nothing. I'm not going to go spray it with glyphosate and take it out and go plant corn tomorrow. So we always have that window to make that decision. But I do think that you can tell so much about winter canola this time of year, which is really interesting. And so there are some fields that are already, we know they're done. And so exactly. If you know they're done, Then if that winter canola was planted following winter wheat, you buy the corn seed. And I got asked that question. Wait a minute, you can't grow corn after canola. Well, you can't grow corn after canola if you grow canola as a full crop because it doesn't support the mycorrhizae. But the fact that you planted winter canola last fall and it didn't make it to keep it this spring, it isn't that winter canola kills the mycorrhizae there. It just doesn't support them. The mycorrhizae were there with the winter wheat crop that was before the canola. So you can plant corn absolutely fine following a failed winter canola crop. Make sure you keep the phosphorus up in the starter. I mean, you should do that regardless, but that would be, if there was any negative impact, that would be it. So I think we have that time, but I also think that getting out and scouting now, because canola's demand for nitrogen is incredibly early, and so you have to make the decision from a nitrogen and sulfur standpoint as quickly as you can. If you think you're going to keep that crop, you just have to feed it. If you don't feed it, you are going to reduce yield.
Mm-hmm. All right. One other thing before we're done here for today, because time is getting away on us. I saw on social media that you stepped into Dr. Dave Hooker's class there at the University of Guelph Ridgetown and molded the minds of the next generation of agronomists. How did that go?
A huge shout out to Dr. Dave for inviting me in as a guest lecturer. I mean, it's some work to put the presentation together, and it was a bit of a struggle because Johnson didn't have enough time to do a perfect job. But being able to get a sense of the students in the class and some of the questions and some of the discussion after. And I often hear people talk about, the world is just, we're going to be done moving forward because we have no people that are willing to work. We don't have any people that are, going to drive the industry. That is just such malarkey. You stand in front of those students and there are tremendous young people coming into the agricultural industry, and that just warms my heart. And to be able to, I always challenge them, critical thinking. That is what you're here for. Get enough base knowledge so that when you get that sample analysis of a sulfate sulfur source that actually isn't going to bring any sulfur at all, that you have that base understanding, that base knowledge, so that you can say, oh, wait a minute, that's not right. And we're not going to get sucked into that vortex. So I love doing it. It was awesome. I had a ton of fun. They're students. They're tough to, they don't want to engage, but you put Wheat Pete up in front of him and he's just such an ignorant guy. He just keeps beating on them until they actually do. And it's lots of fun. So thank you so much, Dr. Dave.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of tough crowds, I got to tell you, students can be that. So I'm glad to hear that you had a good time. And we did, I will say, it's always great to hear from the students themselves on the kind of presentations that they enjoy and what they learn from. And thank you for hitting on critical thinking skills. Rather important in this day and age, Pete. And I think we may have a shortage, I'll be honest.
Yeah, it's worrisome, but I'm glad that there are kids out there, students out there that are learning those skills, because that's what we need.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. I do want to, before I let you go, we did talk about, of course, the mental health component of agriculture as well. Stress, busyness, all on the docket tonight for the agronomists. So I hope you will join us tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern. I've got Terry Aberhart out of Saskatchewan and Joanna Wallace from here in Ontario. And we are going to talk about navigating, surviving, maybe even thriving in the busy season of an agronomist's life and see how we do. I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be good. So I hope you can make it.
I will be in the chat. Absolutely.
All right. Ask those questions. All right. And that is, of course, 8 p.m. Eastern. As I said, you can find us on YouTube or head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. at Showtime, and the video will pop up there, or go to YouTube. That works too. All right, Pete, thank you so much for joining me here on the show today. We're going to close it out. I will be back later in the week for the issues panel. If you've got any feedback on today's show, give us a call, 1-855-776-6147, or you can find me across social media at RealAgLyndsey. That's Lindsay with a Y because my mother couldn't spell. All right, talk to you later. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio episode, brought to you by hard-performing carbine insecticide from FMC. Carbine insecticide hits aphids hard with effective, selective, extended control. It also has activity on lygus and tarnished plant bugs. Ask your retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/CA today.